Father God, thank you so much, Lord, just for this time that we have together, and God, for what you are doing in every single one of our churches. I am well aware as I am up here, and I know every person who shared knows it's not about what we are doing, it is about what you are doing. And so, God, would you just, even in these next moments as we are listening to what other churches are trying, would you highlight the ideas that are for us, and would you let us just wash away the things that are not? God, would you help us to see the next right step, not just for ourselves, that we know that is important. God, would you help us to see the next right step for the congregations that you have entrusted under our care? We love you, Lord, and we just ask that your glory would be seen here today. So we pray these things in your name. Amen. All right, so when George first asked me to do this talk, which he insisted earlier I did it, was able to say no to, although I don't believe that, I wasn't sure exactly what to share about. I think I wrote probably 3 or 4 versions of this, but there's nothing like that glaring checkbox on Basecamp to really force a decision. So there's a lot of just good stuff happening at Community of Hope, even as Dale shared earlier about some of our experiments with Alpha and freedom and different parts of our mission statement. But the more that I prayed about what needed to be shared here in this group and at this time and what was mine to share, the more I landed really on 2 invitations I want to share with you today. And the first is simply this, come and see. I want you to come and see an area at Community of Hope where we are seeing a lot of fruit and we are seeing God move, and it feels like what we are trying to do is catch up to it. And so we're trying different strategies and trying to figure out what is working and what is the best steward of what God is already doing. And so I want to share about our family ministries, which is our kids and our youth. We are super creative at Community of Hope, as you can tell by our names, COH Kids and COH Youth. So there you go. And I like to be super practical. So if you're having a hard time attracting your young people, here's your first tip, if you want to get ready to write this down. Lose the vowels, okay? So youth, YTH, that's when they come, okay? Camp, CMP, so there you go. You are welcome. You are welcome. But I want to tell you a story today about my friend Caroline. Caroline, when she first got connected to our church, was a 6th grader a couple of years ago, and she came to a Bridge retreat. Bridge is our ministry for our 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. She came to a one-day Bridge retreat. She was in my small group, and it was her first connection with the church. I tried to do everything I could to make sure she had fun, to make sure she felt connected, to make sure she felt welcome. And at the end of the day, wasn't quite sure how it had gone. 6th graders, they're a different breed, right? You never really know. But the next Sunday, I saw Caroline in church with her mom. And over the next couple of weeks, Caroline and her mom continued to come. And every time I saw Caroline, I would tell her, you have to come to youth. You would love youth. And then her dad and her siblings came to church, and I told them all. It was like when you see that person across the lobby and you beeline for them. I was always beelining for Caroline and telling her, you would love youth. You have to come on a Wednesday. And so the Wednesday finally came when Caroline came to youth. I was so excited to see Caroline there. I was slightly less excited to learn her name was actually Madison. Y'all, it was like a month, okay? It was too long. So Madison and her family, they started to become involved in the life of our church. They really, in many ways, became the poster children for our discipleship pathway. Madison's mom first joined a midweek moms group, and then mom and dad, they took Alpha, they took Connections, they took Freedom, they run our snack shack on Wednesday nights. Dad is still navigating a relationship with Jesus. Mom and Madison were baptized at the beach last summer, and it's been a privilege, yeah. Been a privilege to walk with them. Now, they're carrying a lot, like every family in our church, right? They are a blended family. They're navigating the loss of a child before they came to our church. Each of the 4 children in the family carry some just heavy things with them. And one day when they were at church, I looked at Mom and I was kind of teasing her. I said, I think you're here more than I am, because they're here every time the doors are open. And she looked at me and she said, this is where my kids are the happiest. I will be here anytime I can. So Madison's story is unique, but the trend is not. What we're seeing is that parents, in order for them to come to church, in order for them to come to Christ, we have to reach their youth and their kids first. And so at Community of Hope, we've started doing some different things over the past couple of years, and we've been seeing some exciting trends that I want to share with you. Over the last 2 years, our Wednesday night attendance of our youth has grown 54% in attendance, from 92 up to 142 last year. We have, and it's not about numbers, right? But it is about trends. And so we are seeing an average of 7 new students every single week, with 51% of them who come back at least a second time. Our commitments, we had 22 kids express a call to ministry at camp last year. 39 were baptized in 2025. We have 30 kids who meet every other week for deeper discipleship. And one of my favorites, we're in the second year of our internship and residency program for our college students. And this year we had so many high schoolers who had severe cases of FOMO that we had to develop an apprenticeship layer where they get to come for 20 hours and work for no money at all. And they're very into it. So we've seen all this growth, and I want to tell you about some of the things that we've tried. But before we do that, I want to zoom out for a moment, and I want us to remember why this is so important. When I first was navigating the call to ministry, which means AKA I was trying to tell Dale, no, I did not want to come work at church, the Lord brought a verse to my mind, and in my opinion, it's one of the saddest verses in all of Scripture, and it's Judges 2:10. It says, after that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. Y'all, that's Joshua's generation, right? They had served, it says just a few verses earlier, that they had served the Lord throughout their lifetime. So it's possible for us to serve the Lord faithfully and still leave the next generation behind. And when I read that, I decided that I was going to do everything in my power in my life to not let that be a reality in my own family, in my own church, and now I want to extend that to our network, right? Let's not be the generation that serves the Lord faithfully but leaves the next one behind. It's not good enough. So here's 4 core strategies that I want to share that we're focusing on, things that we're doing, and then I also have a thing that we're wondering, kind of a next step. First is prioritizing adult volunteers. So we know that Sticky Faith research says every kid needs 5 adults surrounding them. And so we have upped the bar on our volunteers, especially for our preteen, that bridge ministry, and our youth ministry. We ask for weekly commitments for those age groups, and for youth, we ask for multi-year commitments. So if someone wants to serve in middle school, we expect them to serve through middle school, and same for high school. We're wondering, our next step there feels like, how do we more specifically pour into those adults who are pouring into our students and make sure that they are continuing to grow in their faith? Another thing that we're doing is that we are really focusing on our theology, which y'all right now are like, okay, great, glad you're doing that now, okay? One thing that I've realized in family ministry is that so many of our kind of the catalytic moments that we set up for kids, like going to camp or going to retreats, are through companies that do not share our Wesleyan distinctives. And so we have started to be a lot pickier and make harder decisions and make some people mad about things that we're no longer a part of. And this is the 3rd year that we are doing our own youth camp in-house now. We've made the same decision this year. It'll be the first summer that our bridge kids, those preteens, will be doing an in-house camp as well. And so we're pulling back and trying to be a lot more picky about the ways that we're teaching our kids and not giving away our influence to outside companies. The thing that we're wondering here, a dynamic that exists at Community of Hope, is that a lot of our next gen staff team also comes to us not out of Wesleyan environments. And so we are wondering about how we even teach our current youth staff members and bring their theology in line with all of the things that we would hold as high values. Thirdly, we are focusing on equipping parents. If you are a parent, you know parenting is hard. And we often say at Community of Hope that parents are the primary disciplers of their kids, and I believe that. And I also know that most parents in my church, including myself on some days, can barely make it through the day. And so if we're expecting them to also have these transformative faith moments with their kids, we've got to do something different. So we are focusing on ways that we can equip and give our parents the tools that they need to reach their kids. Right now, we use something called a milestone strategy, where we come alongside parents and their kids at the key moments of transition in their child's life. So beginning with milestone infant baptism, going to kindergarten, into middle school, high school, and high school seniors. And at each of those experiences, we have something for kids, and we have something for parents, where we are equipping them to parent their new middle school or whatever it is. We teach them how to have the hard conversations that they need to have, how to talk about sex, how to talk about technology, how to talk about faith, about mental health. We encourage them to be the brave parents that will actually hold the line. These have been really important for us, and kind of the next things we're looking towards are starting more parenting small groups, having topical parenting courses. Parents don't know what they don't know, and they make these decisions that have lifelong impact on their kids without even thinking about the implications. And so we want to help them to have those conversations. And then finally, this is our newest thing that we're really experimenting with our youth, and that's accountability. So I mentioned our 30 kids on our youth core team who meet every other week on Sunday for deeper discipleship. They're expected to come to those meetings, to serve on Sundays, to attend a service. It's been so fun this year to see them. They like to sit in the very front row at each service, which I love, except when they heckle you, which I don't. But it's been so cool to see that group growing. And what's been so neat is to see that in these young kids, accountability is arising, accountable relationships are arising naturally among them without us doing anything. So my daughter's a 7th grader, and she has partnered herself with one of our high schoolers. They have a Bible plan, they journal on it, and text each other pictures of their journal pages every single day. And they're not the only one. And it wasn't my idea. It wasn't any adult's idea. And so isn't it fascinating that if people encounter faith at a young age, this desire for accountability naturally arises up in them. And so we're looking for ways to find out how can we spread that, how can we facilitate that, and just think, can you imagine what we are trying to instill in all of our adults, this desire for accountability to be a PSD, if it started with our kids? If it was just a natural way of how they knew to be a Christian, it's powerful. It would change things. It would make our world, our faith look so different. Now, I know this isn't just happening at Community of Hope. In our wave, I feel like every time we have glory sightings, someone is sharing something about their youth. God is doing something special in the next generation. And so my second invitation to you is just this: go and see. Go and see at your own church. What is God doing with your kids and your youth? Go and see how can you support even your next gen staff team. What strategy do they need from you? What encouragement do they need from you? What can you fan the flame of what God is already doing with your ministry? And I think if we do that, I took the liberty of rewriting Judges 2:10, if we were to do that. I'm calling it SN 2:10, okay? It would sound like this. After that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who knew the Lord and what he had done and served him faithfully. And so after that, another generation and another and another and another. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. Y'all didn't catch it. It's Jessica. Come on, that's how she started. Come on. Jeez, I already started out in the negative. I don't know how I'm going to bring this to a positive. Only Jesus can do this, right? So just want to say, hey, we're all on a journey, and you're about to hear some of my journey. And boy, when I was asked to do this, I was like, man, I don't even know what I'm going to say, I mean, just the Lord has just opened so many doors, and it's just been incredible for the last 30 years, and it's just a blessing. It's a blessing. As a matter of fact, in the words of the great theologian Taylor Brown, who's in Wave 6, we're about to have some intense fellowship. So they'll get it. It's an inside joke. It leaves everyone out. Don't do that in your church, okay? I want to thank, of course, George. Brian and I have been friends. George called, and I mean, this guy does not give up. I've never received so many emails in a day and in hours. He's incredible. He stays on top of things, and I need that. And Brian has been a friend since college, and Melinda's here, and it's just a blessing. Just knowing our history and what God has done with us, Craig, and just so it's incredible. So the Sanctification Network, let me just say, it's provided a seat at the table for me. And it's definitely impacted my life. My wave has impacted my life. So let me just start here. My name is Curtis House, a.k.a. Almost But Not Quite. I grew up on a farm and ranch in the Texas Panhandle. I plowed the fields, but my rows weren't real straight. They were almost but not quite. I loved to work cattle and really liked the cowboy world. I wasn't just real good with a horse, and my roping skills still lack to this day, but I'm almost but not quite. I was the youngest of 4 growing up on the farm. My parents once took us kids to Wonderland Park. It was an amusement park in Amarillo. And there was a statue in front of the bumper cars, and me being the youngest, of course, the statue had his hand up. His name was Tiny Timmy, and you had to measure up to him in order to ride the rides, much less the bumper cars, and I was almost but not quite. Now, I'm not a victim in this life. I just want to show you a couple of things, just almost but not quite. When Brian asked me and George asked me to do this talk, it kind of took me back. I'm so grateful that the Lord has provided room at the table for almost but not quite. We do what we call table ministry. Table ministry is exactly as it sounds, ministry around the table. Now, they asked me to do a TED talk to keep it within 10 minutes if I could. And I don't know who Ted was. I understand he's a good talker. Most of y'all are tranquil and copacetic, and I'm about to knock you out. I mean, that's just the way I kind of preach. But anyway, 15 years ago, my wife and I were called. I was a Methodist pastor for 12 years in Lubbock, Texas there. We felt called to come and plant a Wesleyan church in Amarillo, Texas. We participated through another venue originally that no longer exists. And we are our own, 501c3 today. But so we came and we started in a house of people that I didn't know. They just agreed to open their house and their home. And there were 7.5 of us who began a table ministry in that home. When I say 7.5, I mean there was one that was almost but not quite. I was trying to be their pastor. It was new. I heard Dale's story earlier today, and I mean, he started with 8. He was a mega church right off the bat. But I was right there at 7. And so we started around this table, and it's been great. But from those 7 sitting around the table, today over 400 are in life groups in different homes on Wednesday night. And there's a place for them to eat together, to do life together, to study the scriptures together, to grow together. They drop their kids off at church on Wednesday night, and they go to the home, to the table that's prepared for them. So I hope I've answered the why, because I truly believe that why we do what we do is very important, that we understand that all of us have been invited to a table by Jesus himself, and he calls us to invite others to his table as well. My grandmother, she used to set an extra plate at her table, and she would tell us, this is Jesus' seat. And she would pray over it, and she would actually hope that a friend, a neighbor, a salesman, it didn't matter, that they would stop by during supper and sit in that chair. And she would always tell us if they do, they're sitting in Jesus' lap. There were no Tiny Timmys at her table preventing others to come. In Luke chapter 22, verse 7, then came the day of unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, go and make preparations for us to eat the Passover. So let me stop right there. Peter and John are sent ahead. To do what? To prepare the table. So there are those who we call visionary leader tables or leadership tables who are called to set the tables for those who will sit at the tables. You know, when a table's prepared for you, you recognize that. We see that. When there's food on the table and there's a place for us to sit down, it matters to us. We'll continue on. So, Peter and John go and prepare. And in verse 9, where do you want us to prepare for it? They asked. He replied, as you enter the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him to the house that he enters and say to the owner of the house, the teacher asked, where's the guest room, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? Now drop down with me to verse 14. When the hour came, Jesus and his apostles reclined where? At the table. They reclined at the table. We do life with one another at the table, and we should. There are plenty of other scriptures that deal with the table as well. The parable of the great banquet. I love this parable because you have the master and he invites these dignitaries. They all come up with excuses. And then notice what he says. He says, go in the alleyways, the byways, the highways, and invite the almost but not quites. There's room at my table. He calls us to love our neighbors, to invite them in, to nourish one another. In Matthew 25, the question is asked, when did we see you hungry, thirsty, a stranger, naked, sick, or in prison? And he says, whatever you did for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. So hopefully, once again, we've answered the why. So now let's look at here at Harvest Connection Church, where I currently serve, how we do tables. So everything works through tables. Everything goes through tables. Like I said, we started 16 years ago. I was 25 at the time. Come on. I need to tell the truth. I was 26. I'm just teasing. Come on. You got to stay with me. So I'm a little bit older than that. But we ran everything through tables. And our Sunday morning messages, let me just kind of start here so you can kind of see the thought behind it, because I don't really have time to take us through all the tables that we're currently serving from. But if we just look at Sunday morning for just a moment, our messages are preached in series. They're outlined a year in advance. And so, and we have a messaging ministry table that meets every Thursday to go over these messages. From there, those messages go to the children's department, the youth department, the young adult, and the life groups, covering every age. Here's our thought. When the families get together at any time during the week, from the smallest to the youngest, to the oldest, to the tallest, no matter what, they've all received the same big idea. It's part of our discipleship model. And hopefully, they can all sit around the tables and talk about what the big idea was for the church this week, what we're supposed to be carrying for this week. And so the same thing happens with life groups. Life group leaders would be our adult ministry. That's on Wednesday nights. There's a life group leadership guide. And so we expect and we train our life group leaders. And we have a life group leadership summit every year that we cook them chicken fried steaks and or have them cooked. And it's a huge event, and it's a lot of fun. And we sit at the tables together, and we do a training, but we also tell them, thank you for what you are doing by opening up your homes and welcoming others to your table. Now, there are those who are responsible, as I've said, to set the tables, and there are those who will sit at the table. And the most important thing for us is to make sure there's room for all at the table, to make room for each and every one. So, 2 things that make tables work. Here it goes for us. This is what works for us. Intentionality and consistency. It's something we talk about in our wave, but it makes ministry work. Intentionality and consistency. If it's inconsistent, if your table is inconsistent, eventually there's not going to be many sitting at your table. I've learned this the hard way. Plenty of examples there. So I would say that if we look at our men's ministry, for instance, We teach at 6:30 every Tuesday morning, and we have tables set up just like this. And there are leaders at each table, and there'll be a men's message given. And it used to be given for the first 10 years by me primarily. Now, Joshua, who's over here, he leads that, and he assigns different speakers for the tables. But there'll be leaders at each one of the tables, and we teach from 6 to 6:30. And then, from 6:30 to 7, and then at 7, we have leadership guides at the tables. We do everything through table ministry so that they can discuss the topic at hand. We have the elder table, we have the pastoral table, we have ministry tables, and you can imagine what ministry tables look like. Not only do they include children, youth, young adult, elderly, all, but we also have our missions table, which are local and foreign. We have 3 churches we've planted in Kenya. I mean, this deal is, but it's all happening through tables. And so that's what they asked me to share about as far as how we are attempting to make disciples. And in saying that, the truth is, the Lord didn't have to create food. Sometimes I wish he wouldn't have. Much less tables. But he did. And he feeds us there, he teaches us there, he loves us there, and he has gone to prepare a place for us at his banqueting table, where we will not hear, you were almost but not quite, but I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I'm going to turn it over to Adam. I'm just kidding, it's Mark, okay? I've done that so many times, Jessica. Really spoke to me.
Thanks, Curtis. That's actually his name. My name is Mark. I'm one of the pastors at Providence Church in Mount Juliet, Tennessee. And I focused on discipleship and ministries there. So I'm glad to be with you guys. I don't really remember exactly when it was, but I remember standing in a hallway at Providence Church with my friend and colleague, Jacob, and we saw this, we had just seen this couple walk by. It was like a couple that's been at the church for forever. And as we watched them go by, we had seen God working in their lives recently, and we both said, it felt like simultaneously, there go some disciples. It's watched them walk right by. And it shouldn't be all that profound of a moment. That should be something that would be a normal thing that we're saying all the time. But there was something about this particular moment that after 15 years as a church, it seemed like the beginning of a new part of the movement of God at Providence Church. You see, it turns out that disciples, naming other disciples, is contagious. Years later, we were gathered in a living room of a very faithful member of Providence Church. We were gathered for one of 12 capital campaign meetings that were being held over a couple of weeks. So like exciting times, right? We're gathered together talking about raising money. And one young dad named Evan had been tasked with kind of kicking things off, kind of setting the stage, like why this moment was so important. And as he began talking, he began to share how not too long ago, he and his family had lost a newborn daughter. So we had the attention of the room, right? Everybody was leaning into him. He and his wife were understandably desperate to kind of hide from the world for a season. It was actually, I think, the very next day, they decided to head to kind of an out-of-the-way state park in our area just to kind of be hidden. It happened to be the very same out-of-the-way state park that I was going to for my lunch hour run that day. So as I pulled up, Evan was walking out of the bathroom just as I was pulling in, and you know how these coincidences work, right, with God? He walked out of the bathroom, he saw me, and he kind of stopped in his tracks. He looked found. That was the look on his face. We greeted one another. He pointed over to the parking lot where his wife and his toddler were getting ready to go play outside on this sunny day in the park. So we walked over to the car, we talked, we laughed, we cried, and we prayed together. Now you might say, that's just the kind of thing that happens, right, to church professionals. Like we show up when we don't even mean to show up, right? But you and I both know that these encounters aren't limited to those on the payroll of the church. Thank God. Thank God. The best part of Evan's testimony came next. He looked around the room and he said, we had just lost our daughter, and we were lost. He said, I was in a very bad place. He said, but my brothers from Providence Church, many of them right here in that very room, he said, they showed up, and they carried me. And they carried me, and they lowered me down to Jesus. And he said, ever since, slowly, I've been getting up off the mat, just kind of day by day, because of the faith of followers of Jesus who wouldn't let me go. And then, and this is the moment that struck me. He scanned the room again, looked people in the eyes, and he began pointing to people one by one, starting with the guys in his discipleship group. And he said, you're a disciple. You're a disciple. You're a disciple. He just went around the room naming disciples of Jesus. Do you know what happened in my pastor of discipleship heart in that moment? Do you know what happened in the room at that moment? It felt like everything shifted. We were no longer in a capital campaign meeting talking about raising money, although we were. I started believing, like in a different way, just like really believing that God is advancing his kingdom through the church by making disciples who make disciples. Evan's testimony is just my favorite recent piece of evidence that God is forming us into the image of his son. At the end of that meeting, I stood up to close us out, and really all I could think was, that is it. That's what we're doing. That is it. Thank you, Jesus. You know, when the not-so-average George Acevedo calls you up and says he wants 3 short TED Talks on best practices in passionate spiritual discipleship, my thought is, great, George, good luck finding those people. Call me when you have found them. I feel like all I can really do is share with you stories like Evan's story, and you have the same kinds of stories in your world. Of course, there are many more signs across the life of our church as well. And so with both gratitude and humility, I want to say it's working. Whatever we're doing, maybe it's working. But that raises a harder question, actually a couple of questions. Why is it working? And how do you steward something that can't easily be measured? Well, some of it is, of course, measurable. One Sunday in March, 140 people stayed after worship to get together for lunch, meals around tables, to commit to small groups and accountability groups. And that's a number that we can count. People stayed. We can count that. And yes, it's not for every person at every given moment. At any launch that we have for groups like these, there will be people who find out that they are not ready for the kind of deep formational community we're inviting them into. But we keep the door open, and the Spirit of God will do his work. I'll be honest, and you've actually already heard this, we are playing catch-up. But I have come to believe that that might be exactly the best place to be. Maybe the only place to be when it comes to God's movement through God's church. Because, we're not driving this thing. We're just trying to stay in the wake of God's movement, what God is already doing. Many times I'll say to church members, we're along for the ride with you. Here's a picture of the team that we put together to do exactly that work. They kind of hang close to God's activity. We're really creative, so we call them our discipleship operational team at the church. It brings together members from kids ministry, student ministries, adult ministries, small groups, discipleship groups, care ministry, and outreach. It is truly a remarkable team. They came up with that name, Team Remarkable, with emphasis on Mark. But then I asked Pastor Angela to come and join me in leading that team, so that name doesn't really apply anymore. Oh, you got it. So they wanted me to share this picture with you guys as well. This is what happens when you hire a bunch of former teachers, and they get like a little bit of time on their hands. So they came up to this one. They wanted you to know that Jesus is at the center of our team in all things. Over the last couple of years, this team has helped to shape our latest version of our discipleship path, and you guys all have something similar in your churches. It's a tool that invites people to ask 3 questions. where am I with Jesus? How am I becoming like Jesus? And am I doing what Jesus did? We stole all those, obviously. But the way that we kind of emphasize those, we have anchors under each one of those. So we're actually asking our members to ask themselves these questions. Where am I with Jesus? So our kind of anchor for that is worship, just Sunday morning worship. How am I becoming like Jesus? Our anchor for that is small groups, which are really about connection and community. And then, am I doing what Jesus did? And that is where our discipleship groups are kind of the anchor for that. So in a really simple way, that is how we're asking folks to assess, kind of where is your growth? And we have a lot of other areas of ministry that they can jump into as well. One of the things I don't like about this is that it reads really linear, right? And discipleship rarely is so linear. So we also use this image as well, just to kind of capture the integrated, ongoing nature of the journey to become more like Jesus. So one area that we're working to improve is really the front end of our process for folks as they're kind of coming into the church, learning about Jesus. So we're creating systems to track guests who attend our Providence 101, kind of our new guest class. And then those who return for Providence 102 to explore covenant membership and deeper discipleship. And the results from our most recent set of these classes has made us really happy. We had 100% of people that went to Providence 101 return for Providence 102. And 80% of those became covenant members and began pursuing next steps in deeper discipleship. So ultimately, everything that we do comes back to one question. Yes, we have a ministry action plan as a team, but really this is what we're honing in on right now. How do we measure deeper discipleship? How do we do that? Our goal is to be able to verify that at least half of our weekly worship attendance is intentionally growing to become more like Jesus. We're leaving lots of room for disconnected people to come into the church. We believe that we're actually kind of well on our way right now, but probably getting close isn't good enough. We need the systems to know and to keep improving together as a team and as a ministry. So one significant shift recently has been integrating our discipleship groups. It's really kind of like our aim for all of our disciples at the church to come into a covenant group accountability setting. We've moved all those into men's and women's ministries. So we're moving people to accountable relationships where they're asking those questions, right? How is it with your soul? Is there any sin that you need to confess? What work is God doing in you right now? And Scott, what is your next step? And by embedding these groups in this way, every major men's and women's gathering that happens in the life of our church has as its aim, sometimes a covert aim, to get people into accountable discipleship. In March, we launched 10 new groups. And so this is our new rhythm, and we're excited about learning how to measure the fruit that it bears. One of our challenges comes, we've discovered recently, with multiple forms of communication and tracking tools that our different ministry areas are learning. So Angela's been leading us in mapping all of our systems and our communication tools, identifying duplication, exposing gaps, and building toward a dashboard that lets us see at a glance how disciples are growing across every ministry area. In other words, we're in the middle of it. And that keeps us, what keeps us there is knowing that God is building a kind of environment where someone like Evan can walk into a room, a disciple himself, and be able to point out other disciples. Because when disciples start calling out other disciples, when they carry one another to Jesus, we can be sure the kingdom of God is growing. More disciples, deeper disciples. That's what we're all about. Thank you. Amen. Invite Brian Sims to come up and lead us in some time of Q&A.
Yeah, so I get the, thank you, Lee. I get the privilege today of kind of hosting us then for the next little while here. We wanted to set this time up around some best practice. This is actually one of the things that came out of the RAD from previous retreats is we'd love to hear more about some of what some of the particular churches are doing that we can learn from, that we can ask questions about. And so we wanted to make room in this particular session for you all to be able to ask some questions of these three in particular and of some of what they're doing. And I have a whole set of questions prepared if nobody else has any. But I assume in this room, somebody's got a question or two. And so I believe we've got, Melissa's got a microphone right there. She's going to find whomever has questions. And so we're going to start with your questions before we get to mine. And so anybody have a question for either Jessica, Curtis, or Mark in light of the things that the experiments they're trying around this maturing PSDs in their own contexts? Anybody? It always takes one to go first. Yep, right here.
Okay, so Mark, you were saying that you're measuring maturing disciples. What are some of the first steps you all are doing in that? What does that look like of measuring that?
Yeah, I mean, all we have like right now is are they engaging in accountable discipleship settings? And so that's, we actually weren't measuring that before, and we've talked before about it was actually kind of like an organic thing that was happening in the church. So these groups were kind of bubbling up. And so when I say we're playing catch up, that's what I mean. Like we're actually, hey, let's measure them now. Let's count them. And then we'll be able to engage in some other metrics. Yeah.
That's good. Thanks, Taylor. Dion?
Jessica, I was wondering, when you're doing the parent equipping groups, who is teaching that, and how are you accessing that information and all those pieces of the milestones?
For the milestones, it's a family ministry, so it's me and then my children's director and my youth director. So it kind of depends on the age level. Like the younger ones, the kids director owns more. And then as far as accessing the information, we try to curate everything that's out there, so we're just doing a ton of reading and listening, and we have some of our favorite voices that we often point people to, and I have a list that I can send things, but we try to do all the reading that we know. We realized over the years that we would recommend all these books, and then no one had time to read anything, so we're like, okay, we'll read all the books and tell you what you need to know. So that's kind of where we're going. Yeah.
That's great. While we're waiting, Curtis, would you tell us what you mentioned having the hosts, your leaders that actually host the table so there's room at the table. How do you equip your table leaders? What are some of the keys for equipping table leaders?
Yes, I don't. In saying that, we have a life group pastor. Her name's Eloise, and that's her role today. But the way we started doing that is there were a couple of things. First of all, of course, meeting with those who felt called. So we gave the opportunity for those who felt like they were called to open their home and to be one of these leaders, these table leaders, and we would equip a lot of times one-on-one, but we do have the Life Group Summit, and we always equip through that. We have like 3 points that we'll cover. What are those points? One is be prepared spiritually and physically, so that's setting the table. And making sure that, it's prayed up, and also we'll talk about ways of doing that. Yeah. Also, how you welcome the new one that comes into your group, what that looks like, how we embrace, make sure they don't feel almost but not quite. And then the third thing would be to make sure we have a follow-up. If they visited, let's follow up, and and if it doesn't fit them, let's find a place that it does. So we try to make sure that our visionary leadership tables at least know that much to do before they step out and do it.
That's great. Thank you, Curtis. Next question. Yeah. Over here. Melissa's getting her exercise.
You got it.
For Curtis and the tables, if everything kind of flows out of the main sermon series, how does that allow for creativity in your children's ministry, your youth ministry, and your young adults? Do they then curate their own teachings around that, or is everything like flow from that? They teach the same thing, or I guess what does that look like?
So that's an excellent question. So we ran into problems with Orange Curriculum, for example, because it started taking a turn that we were like, where's this going in our children's ministry? So what we incorporate in our messaging team is every age group. The children's minister she's on that messaging team. Youth is on that messaging team. So we make sure that every age group is represented in that. We also try to look for things. Right now, I'll tell you what we're praying over. This next year, what's the subject matter going to be? As far as, how many sermon series are we going to do, and what do those need to be done on? In the summer, normally we'll do expository. We'll pick a book of the Bible. We'll do an expository teaching through that. But throughout fall and spring, we actually try to keep our ear to the ground, say, what is the Holy Spirit saying? What are we hearing from the people? What is cultural and what needs to be taught countercultural as far as biblically? So we go after that pretty hard. That's an excellent question, and we don't. And there is that rotundum that can turn inward. We don't want that. So in what Jessica say, I would just reflect, read, study, find that information. But you're onto something there, because you can become very introverted in that way. So thank you.
Yeah, it's good. Anybody else? So another question that comes to my mind while we're waiting for somebody else to raise their hand. Jessica, as I was thinking about you talking specifically about raising up the next generation, and particularly one of the things that caught me was this Wesleyan theological focus. And I heard you saying, we're trying to do our own camps and some things like this now because they were getting some influence that was giving us, some sour taste there. But as I began to reflect on, how do you go about, and maybe this is an upcoming, maybe it's what you're already doing, or maybe it's experiments that lead to, but how do you actually invite people, young people, into Wesleyan kind of accountability where they could be formed in that kind of theological perspective, but more than just taught about it at our church camp or whatever. So I'm just wondering, what you have in mind as you think about the theological emphasis, Wesleyan theological emphasis in particular.
It's a great question, Brian. I think this is, again, one of those places where we're seeing God move and we're trying to figure out what we can come alongside. And so I think the accountability piece is the part that has our attention right now, and just how the kids are hungry for it and developing it themselves. And I know you've even shared with your own daughter that happening. Some of the things we've even played around with our youth is we have a teaching team model at Community of Hope, and so we've thought about how can we mimic that with our youth, with having youth serve on the teaching team as well. And then one thing even to what you were saying, Curtis, we don't think we have all the answers, and so the answer isn't to go internal for everything, but looking for different places that share our same heart and spirit, where the kids do need external voices. They don't need to, it's like a parent, right? Your kid you could say the same thing 17 times and someone else says it and they're like, that's the most important thing I've ever heard. So the same thing happens within your church and your youth group. And so we're trying to just investigate other environments. And I think that's what excites me about this network even, is how we can be external voices for each other, even in some of these ways, but we know we have the same end in mind and the same distinctives and the same flavor. So those are some of the things we're wondering about.
That's good. Thank you, Jessica. Somebody else? Other questions, comments, reflections on what you heard in the last little bit here? What's stirring in you? Yes, ma'am. Leanne's got a question. This is the quietest this group of people's ever been.
Will you tell me about a mistake you made?
I'd love to. I'll tell you a funny one. That there was a time that when I was Methodist pastor, my first appointment, of course, I was reading all the cellular books and how to get people in cell groups and what to do. So I just decided that we were going to put everyone in that church in a small group. And so I did it. We had 22 when I got there, so we can do this. And it was funny because I put them we had like 3 life groups that were going to meet on Wednesday nights. And sure enough, after the first Wednesday, a lady comes to see me on Thursday, and she goes, "Hey, Pastor Curtis, I got to tell you something." She said, "I don't really like this lady that you put in my group. And she's in a small town. This is Happy, Texas, USA. And so she's like, I don't really like her. And we've not spoken in 20 years. And so I was just trying to think, and I said, well, you know what? I really don't like her either, and that's why I put her in your group. But that didn't go over well. But that really was a mistake. We kind of threw people together. I've done this for years. Even when I was youth director, we did what we call Knights of the Round Table. We call it court and table ministry with the youth. But in that, just knowing that many times, people have different values, and it doesn't work every time. We're still trying to, listen to the Holy Spirit. I will say, too, we've had groups, plenty, fall out. As a matter of fact, if I mention that ministry, none of those groups are together today. So there's been a failure there some way. So that's one of my failures anyway, is just putting people in groups, not praying over that, making sure that the invitation, actually today we're at a place where the invitation we ask our leaders to ask new people in church to come to your group, maybe even before membership class, come to their group and give an invitation anyway. And that's worked a lot better than myself or the life group pastor and her putting them in groups. So, thank you. I didn't mean to take you. Y'all go ahead. Let's hear y'all's failures.
I've got plenty.
I love how Jessica handled me the microphone on that question. She's like, I want to make sure you have a microphone. Like our current iteration of accountable discipleship groups is probably the third attempt in 10 years, and even our current one feels like it came out of a missed opportunity for me. I think I may have shared this a couple years ago, but it really began in a group of men in our church. We had like 80 guys gathered on a Thursday morning for prayer, and I just kind of set the stage for accountable discipleship and broke them up. I lightly set the stage for accountable discipleship, and then broke up the room, kind of broke up into groups, and I saw the guys I wanted to spend time with and grow as a disciple with. I went over to them. That group is still going, but I think it's the only one out of that group. However, out of that, people have seen that happening, and that's where the organic groups have started to come out of that. So out of my best mistakes, God can still do good things.
I have a mistake. Are we still going? If I think on parenting and equipping parents, I think some of the mistakes I made at the beginning of this was assuming that parents just needed more information and then they would just do what they needed to do. And what parents really need is encouragement. Sometimes they need information, but what they just need is someone to say, I see you, and you can do this, and it doesn't matter what yesterday looked like, but we can change tomorrow. And so I think that's shifted even in our classes where the goal is information. Sometimes they do need information, but more often they just need to know they're not alone in trying to figure it all out. And so I think I used to be like, here's 50 books and 40 podcasts, and if you do this, you'll be great. And so trying to, maybe even just to myself sometimes saying that, but.
Got room for a couple more. Yep, Julie?
Hey, Curtis, I think I understood that you're saying you have accountability embedded in your men's and women's, in your small groups. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that works and how that's working?
Yeah, so Pastor Joshua, who's sitting over here to my right, he is very good at speaking with the men, like for our men's group that meets on Tuesday mornings that I spoke about, making sure those leaders are where they need to be, making sure that they're holding their table somewhat accountable for attendance. But also, I'll sweep around and through the room and ask, is everyone here today? Who are you missing? Who do we need to call? But it's really more on in a relational way rather than hey, you need to make sure your table's full. Where the rest, make sure you're making your phone calls and that type of thing. I do think intentionality is great in the sense that it's done relationally and not what's the word I'm looking for, Brian? I'm just a country boy from West Texas. But anyway, so are you. Why am I asking
also
you?
a country boy from West Texas.
So anyway, but in that, we really we're kind about it. Joshua is one of the most kind. He's a lot kinder than I am. And he was a Marine and I was armed. But anyway, but he really, we do that. We also, we don't expect either. For our women do the same ministry. They do theirs on Monday night, have tables just like this. They give a women's message scripturally, and then they have their table leaders and all, and have their times of equipping as well. But we really try to do it more relationally and intentional in that way, rather than checking the boxes and saying, hey, you've got 2 missing from your table. Make sure you call them and have them lined up next week. I did that about 10 years ago. I was that guy. But I realized our tables became less and less. And I needed that relationship with them. So we really are heavily stressing relationships right now with our tables and with one another and with our leaders as best we can.
Good. Anybody else before we start to wrap up today? Yes, Dion. Buenas.
I'm making up because I wasn't here yesterday. So I was wondering about, we do community groups, and the multiplication piece has been the piece that has stumped me for a while. And so we're sort of at a stagnant place until we have new facilitators or leaders. So I wondered if you could speak to that.
I think multiplication is, our Wave 6 just hit on this earlier today because, we don't use the word divide, we use the word multiply, and we really try to watch our semantics. But in all of that, we really have slowed down in that way. I've been in my life group now for 10 years, so it looks a little bit different. Now, I'm helping my wife right now in Elevate 56, which is our 5th and 6th grade program. So we'll jump into the life group about once or twice a semester right now. But it's still the same life group, and our life group takes care of one another and all. But we've found that leaders really tend to rise up, and they start seeing the need. Hey, our home's got 18 people in it. Any of you feel called to do this? And there's usually someone that feels called. And then they'll get with our life group pastor. Our life group pastor will take them through a series of training and go from there. I will say, too, I hope that you heard me say, start small. Just maybe one table. Just invite someone to your home. That's all we did. The first life group was our church. And it grew. Eventually, we moved it to my house. It grew to 18 kids in my home. And I thought they were going to tear our house down. I did. And that's the honest truth. And so the journey has just been wild, but we found that when we kept using multiply and add and divide and, if it didn't happen, and I know some of you may disagree with this, and this is fine, but if it didn't happen through spontaneity and a call, it's just like us as pastors. If we're not called, we're not going to still be here 5 years from now. I mean, that's just the way it works. But if you're called and you have people called, and pastor is the number one gift given. So you have pastors in your church. They're laity pastors or whatever you want to call them. I hate to make the division, but they're there, and they'll feel as they press into the Holy Spirit, this is what we're supposed to do. We've got to give an invitation to the table. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, Dion, there's a difference between expectation and invitation, and so there's 2 sides of that. Like, to hear the group that we heard this morning, if they had an expectation from the start that they were going to divide, separate within a year or something, then we wouldn't have heard that great story, right? Really however, like the last group that I just started, I actually left that original discipleship group that's still going and started to start a new one. I felt a calling to do that, and part of that's just like, I want to keep modeling as much as possible. One of the guys I invited to that new group, we met, the second time we met, I kind of put out there just like the invitation of, if you feel this at any point, let me know to go and start a new group. The next week he called me and he came one more time, I think, and started 2 new groups since then. And so, there's the invitation to it is good. The expectation might be heavy and limiting.
That's good. One final question today. Anybody? Well, I want to wrap us up, and then we did George and others, creative thing with the schedule here is we've got a short break between now and when we go to our wave groups, and part of the intention of that was that we figured there'd be people in the room who might want to ask a question of one of these three folks, or maybe some of their team, or maybe even something stirring in you, and you want to ask a question to somebody that's here, and but didn't really want to have the mic and ask it with the whole room, but instead just a personal conversation. So we want to make a little space for that. It also occurs to me that in inviting these folks, I mean, first off, can we say thank you to Curtis and Jessica and Mark? They really did have a choice to say no, but apparently none of them felt like they really had a choice, George. I don't know what that was about in the way we asked, but it does occur to me. I mean, these are three churches that are bearing fruit, and we want to celebrate that. There are also three churches that are on the way, on the journey, and we all still have a long way to go. And part of what's beautiful to me in this gathering is that we got churches of every size and every shape, all different kinds of experiments going on. And I'm reminded in this moment of one particular church that I'm getting an opportunity to coach. It's a little bitty place, and I get a call from the pastor, and I'm getting a chance to coach, and he says, we started inviting people to think about being a part of like real accountability to grow up as disciples of Jesus, and there's more interest than we thought there would be. There's this expectation, and a lot of it's cultural in his church. It's cultural in most, that it's like most people are just here. But there's a hunger that surprised him. And so they made an offering, like, for people to, like, if you're actually interested, why don't you come? Come and learn about this. And if you want to be in a group, here's what the groups are going to do. And it's a simple little pattern. It sounded an awful lot like loving, learning, and leading. But that we would be accountable to each other. And they thought it would run people off. And instead, in no time, they had more than 60% of their people in weekly accountable relationships. I'm like, you want to talk about changing the culture of a church? Where you got that many folks. But the reason I share it with you is, one, it's a similar story, but it's a little bitty place. And two, the surprise is the hunger right now. I was like, I always wonder, friends, has the hunger already been there and we forgot to ask the question? Yeah. Or is there awakening happening and the hunger's new? Either way, we get the responsibility, the great privilege, the honor to invite, to actually say, there's a place here at the table. And I'll end with this just because it's so fun and it relates to what Jessica just shared, but our daughter, and she's in a small group, in her youth group, but they don't do accountability. They just listen to a teacher talk. No offense, but that's kind of the way it works. But on their own, they're texting each other every single day with what they're reading in the scriptures. And I'm like, there is just this desire to grow, to be like Jesus, that is evident, and it's contagious. And so it's happening all around you. Don't miss it. Don't miss it. Don't forget to invite. Don't assume that just because there are people sleeping through your sermon, that everybody's like that. Somebody's ready. And so thank you again, guys, for sharing today. We're going to take a break now. I think we're going to report to our wave groups here in the next 5 to 10 minutes, and we'll finish out there at 5, and then I think the evening is